You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast.
Hello, I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Jyotsna Sreenivasan, author of These Americans. Jyotsna was selected Fiction Fellow for the 2021 Swanee Writers Conference and a finalist for the 2014 Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Welcome, Jyotsna.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Well, thank you. All right. So you have a brand new book out this year, These Americans. How has publishing changed since 1994 when you released your first book?
Oh my God. Yes. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to talk about how publishing has changed, but I guess I can talk about how I have grown or learned more about publishing, I guess.
That would be perfect.
Yeah. So my first children's novel was published by a small publisher in Minnesota, actually, and it was excerpted in 6 issues of a new magazine at that time called New Moon Girls, and it was a feminist magazine for girls. And I didn't know anything about publishing, and I was just thrilled to be part of that, and that was super fun. And my second venture was another children's novel that my sister-in-law actually published. And what I learned was that at that time, and I think it's still true, people saw that as, quote, self-publishing, even though it was my sister-in-law. And they, bookstores or book reviewers would look down on you if you did something like that. I thought it was cool to have my sister-in-law publish this book. She had one of her own books, but people would look down on you. And I was trying to get reviews, and I had a book review magazine tell me, well, we don't review books like that because we assume they're bad.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know.
Wow.
So I really learned a lot about the whole, like, there's different levels or different, like a hierarchy of like what's, considered, I don't know, good or prestigious or something like that. So I didn't even know anything about that before. Later on, I published another novel called And Laughter Fell from the Sky. And that was not for kids. It was for adults. And that was with a really big publisher, HarperCollins. And that was another interesting experience because you didn't have the, it was a prestigious publisher. It was a big publisher.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the author doesn't have as much of a say in those kind of situations. I didn't really have a say on what kind of cover they chose or how they chose to market it or how they chose to position it. So that was another education for me. With this book, These Americans, it's a small publisher again. It just so happened, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to big publishers or that I'm opposed to small publishers. It's just so happened that that's who picked this one up. I'm working very closely with the publisher and editor in terms of the cover, in terms of how they're positioning it and all of that. But of course, it's small. They don't really have much of a budget for marketing and that type of thing. So, there's give and take in all these different situations.
There's just so many questions we can ask from that story you just told.
Yeah.
So how did you get connected to HarperCollins?
Well, with those big publishers, you have to have an agent, and that's a whole nother can of worms. And I think you have done a show on finding an agent.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
I noticed that. So I don't necessarily need to go into that, but with you have to have an agent, and they're kind of like the gatekeeper. You can't approach those publishers until you have an agent. So I went through the process to get an agent, and this is who she sold it to. And I think it was, an editor that she had known from grad school. So there was a connection there.
Yes, that's what Lucinda, the agent, spoke to us about. She said it's all about relationships.
It is. And finding someone to read your manuscript.
Right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your process? So you started writing in 1994, and how did you even think you would be an author in 1994?
I've always loved to write, even when I was a kid and, in high school, college. I majored in English and I worked at different nonprofits in Washington, D.C. I would do some writing and some, organizing and different things like that. And then in my spare time, I was very interested in the idea that when girls get to be around 12 or 13, they lose their confidence.
Mm-hmm.
This was some studies that had been done at that time. And so I thought, I want to write a book about a girl who goes back in time to ancient Crete, where women and men were equal, because I'd been doing some research on ancient Crete as well. And
Okay.
so
Great.
it was a time travel adventure
Uh-huh.
novel.
Great.
This New Moon magazine, which is a feminist magazine for girls, they loved it. They picked it up, and it was just one of those things. I think my husband at the time heard about New Moon magazine on NPR and said, "Hey, why don't you contact them?" So it was just one of those things that I followed that lead.
It must have been a great feeling to think that so many people are reading your work through the
Yeah,
magazine and then
yeah,
following
and
it each month.
yes, and I'm still friends with the people who started that magazine. And
Oh,
so it was, and it's a wonderful magazine. I got subscriptions for my nieces, and I don't have girls. I, I have boys who are grown up now, but I would have gotten them the magazine if they had been girls.
Right.
so you're starting off young and you have this written
Yeah.
and that you have your confidence. What was the next part of your journey?
Yeah, I wrote another novel that was kind of like a sequel to my first novel, The Moon Over Crete. And that one, I don't know, it just didn't, sequels are hard. So
Sure.
I had somebody read it, and it just wasn't that exciting. So I kind of abandoned that one, and then decided to write a novel about, very autobiographical novel about an Indian American girl growing up in Ohio. And that was Aruna's Journeys. It's called Aruna's Journeys. And that's the one that was published by my sister-in-law, that I learned so much about, the struggles of people who, when you have a very small publisher, or people think it's self-published. So I learned a lot from that. But yeah, that book is still out there. And I think sometimes, you'll have different groups of students who read that. It's been a while though.
Yeah, but wait, you just hit on a pretty cool thing. So students were reading your book
Yeah.
about specific, like teachers said, this is a book we'd like you to read.
Yeah. Apparently there's, I'm not, my son said, oh, it's on this list where they kind
Ah,
of say that they tell you what, like, grade level or what difficulty level it is. And it's like students could pick from that list. And so my son was the one that told me, "Hey, mom, your book is on this list." And so I thought that was pretty cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that is
Yeah.
so
great.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So then it's possible that kids were having discussions about your work in
Yeah.
their classroom. Oh,
Yeah. It's
Wow.
possible.
that
Yeah.
That
is
is absolutely wonderful. What a
Uh-huh.
neat feeling.
Mhm.
Writing a book has to be cool, first off, because you're touching people's lives, but then to have it recognized by teachers saying this is a wonderful book to teach our children, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real honor to have that happen.
Yeah. All right. So then when you were writing, did you have like a certain style? Like, did you say, I'm going to write for an hour each day? Or did you lock yourself up like in a room? Or were you just like free flowing? Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, I when I, before kids, I didn't really have a very rigid schedule or anything, because, I had lots of time. And
Right,
right.
right.
so I would write on the weekends or evenings, or whenever I felt like it. After I had kids, and then I had, a full-time job and kids, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and write for an hour before I went to work. And that was my special time. And I really looked forward to it, actually. So it wasn't like a difficult thing, or
Or not a chore.
it was not a chore for me. I really enjoyed it, getting up before everyone else was up, and having that time for myself. And one of the neat things about doing that for me was, when I put in that time in the morning, I would be kind of thinking about my writing kind of during the day, and coming up with different ideas, even though I wasn't sitting in front of my computer typing. So that was a benefit. You kind of seed those ideas,
Mm.
and then you can keep thinking about whatever problems or challenges, and maybe the next day you can figure out how to solve those. Yeah, and so that was when I was working, kind of an office job. It wasn't a super stressful office job, so I was able to do that. Now I'm a middle school and high school teacher, which is wonderful. I love it. It's, challenging to be a teacher. And so when I get up in the morning, I'm thinking about my students and how I want the day to go, and I don't have the bandwidth to do my writing in the morning.
Hmm.
So I do more of my writing now in the summers, or on vacations. When, fortunately, as a teacher, I have the winter break and the spring
Hmm.
break and summer break and all that.
I have to ask, do you have your students read your book?
No, I kind of try to keep them separate. Like I just kind of try to keep my writing life separate from my
Hmm.
reading life, and I think it'd be awkward to say, "Oh, I wrote this book," and then what if the student didn't like it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't want them to feel like they had to say they liked it or whatever.
Right. In order
So
to
I
get an
kind of
A.
keep that really separate.
And now you've written These Americans.
Uh huh.
And so can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, it's 8 short stories and a novella about Indian Americans. And it's for adults, but I think high school students can read it too. It's not, there's nothing in there that I would think, I wouldn't want my high school students to read. There's not like a lot of drugs or alcohol or anything like that.
Hmm.
So the stories are pretty autobiographical, I would say. Not all of them, but like the first one is about a new immigrant mom in Ohio giving birth to her American daughter. And it's based on what my mom has told me about my birth.
Wow.
So yeah, and then in each story, the second generation character, the child of immigrants, gets older. The stories all have different characters, but there's kind of a continuation in terms of that the child of immigrants is getting older. So, for example, in the second story, the girl is 7 years old. And then by the end, by the novella at the end, the second generation character is middle aged. She has children of her own. Her immigrant mom is elderly, like that. So I
Okay.
wanted to give kind of a sense of the life cycle of Indian Americans. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. Every family is different, obviously, but some sense of a life cycle like that.
Sounds like a great idea for a book.
Yeah,
Hmm.
very good. Well, I'm Polish and my great
Uh-huh.
aunts came over here on a boat, and I
Wow.
just thought about how much courage that takes
Mm-hmm.
to leave your homeland,
Mm-hmm.
maybe never seeing your family again.
Mm-hmm.
So, congratulations to your mom for and dad, I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming, for
Mm-hmm.
coming over here and
Mm-hmm.
starting a new life that had to be extremely I would think scary.
I would think
Yeah,
so too.
yeah.
Yeah, stressful and scary and all
Yeah.
of that.
It takes,
Mm-hmm.
a real go-getter, right?
A
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Mm-hmm.
courage,
Yeah, a lot of
that's for sure.
courage.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your website, Second Generation Stories, Literature of Children of Immigrants. That sounds
Yeah.
like a very interesting website.
Yeah. So one of the things I realized, so when I was a kid, growing up, I just thought my family was weird. I had these parents who were from another country. We'd go to a Girl Scout potluck, and my mom would bring some strange Indian dish. Of course, everyone loved it, but
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
like thinking, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Mom, why don't you just bring macaroni salad or something?
Yeah, right.
And so I didn't know that this was a common experience of second generation people, no matter where your family is originally from.
Mhm.
And so it was only when I was probably in my 20s that I started reading some literature by second generation Americans. A Chinese American woman wrote a book called The Woman Warrior. Maxine Han Kingston is the author.
Hmm.
And when I read that book, I thought, oh my gosh, her family's from China, my family's from India, but we have a very similar experience of feeling pulled in two different directions, trying to figure out how we fit in. We felt American. I felt American. My parents didn't necessarily identify as American. They're still looking back to the country they came from. They want me to also be that way. I'm not that way. I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Ohio. I'm an Ohioan. But you're pulled in two different directions. You're trying to figure out how you fit in to the broader American culture. And then eventually you want to figure out how you can contribute to that culture. So to me, I thought the second generation, this is my opinion, but I feel like the second generation is where the becoming American part happens. This is where, because we're a country mostly of immigrants,
Mhm.
but we're all Americans now. Where did
Correct.
that becoming American happen? I think it largely happens in the second generation. And now obviously this is a very big generalization. And so I became fascinated by second generation experiences. So on my website, I list and review memoir and fiction by the second generation, just because I think of course, I'm biased because I am second generation, but I feel like it really says a lot about what it means to be American because this is the generation that's happening.
Right. It makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense what you say
Hmm.
because you're right. The first generation still is thinking about the old country and why
Hmm.
isn't it that way here?
Right.
Right. And
Hmm.
much more difficult time with the language. And then the
Hmm.
second generation doesn't even know the old language a lot of times.
Right. And that, I know our parents want us to speak that
Sure.
language. Maybe we may or may not speak it. My parents actually didn't teach me the language that they spoke. When we went, ended up going to live in India for a couple years when I was a kid, and I just picked it up. I didn't pick up a very good version of it. And then my accent in English also changed. I ended up having an Indian accent in English. And when I came back to the US when I was 7, I had this Indian accent and I didn't realize it.
Oh.
And the other kids were like, why do you speak that way? I'm like, what way do I say? So, and eventually I developed an American accent again, but the second generation generally does develop an American accent. They may or may not speak the language of their parents, and that's sometimes a source of tension or conflict with the parents. The parents want uh, us to, love the culture that they know,
Hmm.
and but that may not be the culture that we know.
Yeah, it seems like a
Yeah.
very interesting thing. And then on top of that, just being a kid is difficult enough.
Right.
And then,
Right. Right.
Right. Everybody's embarrassed by their parents, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, Jyotsna, what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome while writing your books?
I think for me, knowing when a story or a novel is ready to be sent out. I always think something is ready, and then I start sending it out and I get, rejections, and then, well, why? So it's good to have people read your work beforehand. So I have friends, there's online communities where you can get people to read your work. Even when you get critiques and suggestions and you're doing all these revisions, it's still really challenging for me to know when something is ready. And so revision is like the biggest process for me. And then maybe sending something out and getting some rejections and thinking, oh, I should do it this other way. But I think that's a challenge for a lot of people, definitely for me.
Right. What's your process like after you think that you're finished with the book? Do you have friends read it? Do you have
Hmm.
a group followers who offer to read it? How does that
Oh,
work?
I wish I had followers. I don't have no. Yeah, I have a bunch of friends that I've met over the years, and we'll exchange manuscripts. If it's a story, there's a bunch of online communities where you can post your story. You have to, critique 3 or 5 other stories, and then there's a way to send a little email to people. Hey,
Sure.
I critiqued your story. Can you critique mine? It's a really lovely way to get feedback, and you don't know these people, but usually people are really generous with their, because they want you to critique their stories as
Sure,
well.
but people want to
So
help,
yeah,
and
so
people want to share their work, so it's
right,
just
so
natural
that
that you would help somebody who's doing something similar to what you're doing.
right, exactly. So I definitely use those online communities and as well as friends, and sometimes in the past I've had writing groups where we would actually meet in person, once a month or so. I don't have a writing group right now, but we might start an online group. I just went to a writing conference, the Sewanee Writers Conference that you mentioned, and so the people that were in my workshop, we were kind of thinking about, oh, we could maybe have a group or continue to exchange manuscripts. So yeah, that's a really useful thing for writers to have friends or have some kind of community where you can exchange work and get critiqued and get suggestions for revision.
Do writers groups do things other than just critique each other's work? Do you get together and bounce ideas off? Like, I'm thinking my story should go this way.
We could, yeah, you could. The groups that I've been in, mostly you have a story that is finished, and or you think it's at least as finished as you can make it,
Sure.
and you circulate it, and then people get together and read it, and there's a lot of laughter. I mean, of course you're nervous when you're on the hot seat, but it's also fun when, especially as you get to know people and you get more comfortable with people, then you can have fun and not be quite so nervous about the whole thing.
It's kind of like your classroom, right? The first
Right.
day everybody's kind of tense,
Right.
and by the second or third week you're in your groove then.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
What about your book covers? Can you tell us any interesting stories about how your book covers came to be?
With this latest one, These Americans, that I love the cover of that. It's basically got a picture of um, a woman in a sari. She's an Indian woman in a sari holding a baby, and then flipped is a that same picture, except the woman is dressed in Western clothes and she also has a baby. So the idea is that the immigrant woman, had a baby, and that baby grew up and then had her own baby. So the first picture, the one with the woman in the sari, that's basically my mom holding me. So it's a old picture of my mom holding me, and I just love what the artist did with that.
Yes.
So it wasn't really my idea. I just sent them some pictures, and this is what they ended up doing. And we went through some revisions, but overall, I was really happy with it. I think it's a nice bright color. It's got a lot of color on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I
Mhm.
think the colors are very appealing also.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very nice cover.
So who picked the artist?
My publisher, she hired her and paid her and all that. So I didn't have to do any of that stuff. And like I said, when with it depends on the publisher. Sometimes you'll have a lot of input, and sometimes you really won't. They'll be like, "We're doing the cover," and
Oh, okay.
yeah, and we don't care what you think.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously they're not going to say it that way, but
Right, of course.
yeah, it just depends.
And what about publicizing your books? What have you been doing?
With this book, I have been focusing on two kind of populations. Ohio, since I'm from Ohio.
Mhm.
So I want, book reviewers, podcasters like yourself, librarians, professors. I'm reaching out to all of those people. I want people to be talking about my book if they're in Ohio. And then the other population is Indian Americans all over the country. So I'm trying to get reviewed in different publications that go to Indian Americans or podcasts and that type of thing. I know I can't do the whole country, so I'm
Yeah.
trying to focus on two populations. I think what I'm finding is that you get a lot of cross pollination. If you're focusing on Ohio, someone will say, "Oh, I heard you on this," or "I saw the article here," and
Wonderful.
then then you're at a book fair and they come to see you there. I was just at Loganberry Books in Cleveland, and so a couple people were like, "Oh, I heard you on this show or whatever."
Great.
So instead of like being just a little drop in a huge ocean of the country, because it's a smaller group, just Ohio,
Mhm.
you can maybe get a little bit more talk about it.
More publicity.
So more, a little
Yeah.
more interest because
Yes.
things are feeding off each other. So that's what I'm learning now.
Right. I like that idea of just
Mhm.
pinpointing of a geographical area that you can go after.
Yeah.
That's a neat idea.
Uh-huh.
And it's obviously more difficult trying to promote a book during a pandemic when it's harder to see people and harder to get people to come out.
Yeah.
But I would think maybe some in the Indian community, there might be some places that you could go and speak
Well,
and see
yeah, I
people.
haven't. The in-person things that I've done so far are the writing conference, which wasn't really so much publicity as just kind of networking with other
Hmm.
authors. So that's important too,
Sure.
because other authors may be talking about books. They may have a column, or they may have you just don't know what's gonna. And then maybe I can help them too in a way, so
Sure.
we can help each other.
Right.
And then the other in-person opportunities I'm looking at are different book fairs in Ohio. But within the Indian American community, I mean, everyone is just so spread out. I'm thinking of trying to maybe do like a Zoom event or something like that,
Oh, okay.
more than an in-person event. I don't know. I'm just, I actually, because I'm second generation, I haven't really been that closely in contact with my community. So I'm
Right.
having to try to figure it out. Yeah.
Jyotsna, what would be your advice to aspiring writers?
So my advice to aspiring writers is to write. Try it, see how you like it, and don't give up, because it can be hard to translate your vision for something into a piece of writing that another person is going to understand in the same way that you want them to understand. I remember when I was in high school, I wrote a poem about, I used to play field hockey, not very well, but there I
Okay.
was on the field hockey team. And one of the things I loved about field hockey is just being out on the field and looking at the sky and the clouds. And I wasn't very competitive at all, which was why I wasn't very good at it. I was like, oh, okay, I don't care who gets the goal. Anyway,
Right,
but I just
right.
love being outside, and I wanted to write this poem about being outside on the field hockey field and how beautiful it was. So I wrote this poem, and I asked a friend of mine to read it, and she read it. And then she got this kind of puzzled expression on her face. And she was like, "Is this about lawn mowing?"
Ah.
So clearly she was
Yeah.
not getting what I was trying to. So, you just have to keep working at it, keep trying, getting the feedback from other people, revising. If it's something that is important to you, if that's your path in life to be a writer, go for it. You know, keep doing it. We all get a lot of rejection, and that doesn't mean that you're not good at it. That just means that maybe there's something different about, maybe you need to do it in a different way. So don't let rejection make you feel that this is not the path for you. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, one author that we spoke to even said timing could be everything. They've had some book that they publishers have said, "Oh, you just missed the time. That was really good maybe, a year ago, but now it's due."
Oh,
Or give us
oh,
maybe you're ahead of time that
uh-huh.
the trends move on or move
Mhm.
back.
Mhm.
And they said time is a lot too.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's I think impossible to exactly time your work for some trend, because A, we don't know what the trends are going to be,
Sure,
and B, it could take a really long time. We want to give ourselves, at least I want to give myself, the time that it takes to do a good job.
sure.
So if you're rushing to catch a trend, I don't know.
Right.
That
It's a difficult one. Yeah.
It's difficult. Yeah.
Right. Well, where's the best place to purchase these Americans?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on bookshop.org, which is an online bookseller that supports independent booksellers. You
Great.
can request it if your local bookstore doesn't have it. You can ask them to buy it. So that's another way that you would support the local bookstores. And I would love people to request it from their library, because I'm trying to get more Ohio libraries to carry it. So if you look for it on your library, online website, and that you don't see it, please request for them to buy it, because I would love for more libraries to carry it.
Hey, thank you for saying that because I don't know how many times I have requested a book and it wasn't on their site.
Uh-huh.
And that's good to know that I can actually request it or
Oh my
say, ask,
God,
can you
I
buy it?
do
I
that
never thought
all
about
the
that.
time. Yeah, usually
Oh,
some libraries are a little bit more open about the fact that they will do this for you, and some try to hide that fact.
okay.
But yeah, there's usually a link where you can fill out the book that you want, and they'll consider buying it. And if it's available and it's not super old, they generally will buy it for me, the books that I ask them to buy.
Excellent.
So yeah, so people should definitely do that. Yeah.
When we're finished here, we'll check with our library.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Jyotsna, it was fantastic having you as a guest on our podcast. Thank you very much for sharing the stories of all your published books.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being on your show.
And congratulations on all your published books there. I mean,
Oh
that's
my
pretty
goodness.
cool. How
Thank
many
you.
people just that publish one book is amazing. And you have many. I mean, just incredible. So, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.